When we discuss the great financial collapses of history, we usually focus on the spectacles, the panic on Wall Street in 1929, the wheelbarrows of cash in Weimar Germany, or the toxic mortgages of 2008. But the most brutal collapses are the ones where an entire generation wakes up to find their future has simply been erased. This is the story of Mexico in 1982 and again in 1994. A story of overconfidence, debt addiction, and the absolute destruction of a thriving middle class. A blueprint for financial ruin that stands today as the single most critical warning for the United States. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your entire life savings can no longer buy you security. Your national currency is bleeding value by the hour. The banks that held your deposits have been seized by the government. That was the grim reality for millions of Mexicans, marking the dawn of la década perdida, the lost decade. Mexico's crash wasn't caused by a barbarian invasion or a revolution. It was caused by arithmetic, hubris, and an iron law of finance. Debt is a tool of leverage, and leverage always concentrates power in the hands of the creditor.
To understand the tragedy, we must rewind to the late 1970s. Mexico was not seen as a vulnerable developing nation. It was hailed as a rising star, the future oil giant of the Western Hemisphere. Massive new oil discoveries fueled euphoria. Bankers in New York, London, and Frankfurt lined up to lend money, convinced that Mexico's oil wealth was the new gold that would cover any bill. The Mexican government, led by President José López Portillo, borrowed massively. It was a simple vision: borrow now, invest in rapid growth, and pay everything back later with soaring oil revenues. This was the classic delusion that fuels every bubble, the belief that tomorrow's revenue will always cover today's spending. They borrowed primarily in US dollars, often at variable interest rates, essentially tying the nation's entire financial destiny to the policies of its northern neighbor. The money poured in, funding grand projects and creating a rapidly expanding urban middle class, people who bought homes, saved for retirement, and believed in the promise of their nation's sovereign wealth. They trusted the system because the system was flush with cash. But finance, unlike oil, does not flow in one direction forever.
While Mexico was intoxicated by easy credit, the financial anchor of the world, the US dollar, was under immense pressure. The United States, facing crippling inflation, installed Paul Volcker at the head of the Federal Reserve in 1979. Volcker had one mission: crush inflation, no matter the cost. His tool was brutally effective, raising interest rates to painful, historic heights. For Mexico, this was a catastrophe. Since their massive debts were denominated in US dollars at variable rates, every notch Volcker raised the rate meant Mexico's interest payments ballooned overnight. Simultaneously, the global price of oil, the promised revenue stream, began to slide. The financial trap was sprung, income shrank, and obligations soared. Yet the government responded with denial. López Portillo famously declared he would defend the peso like a dog. But bravado cannot defeat arithmetic. Wealthy individuals and corporations, seeing the inevitable, began pulling their money out, a phenomenon known as capital flight. Billions of dollars fled Mexico, secretly moved to real estate in Miami, Swiss bank accounts, or safety in Texas. This capital flight drained Mexico's dollar reserves, leaving the government unable to service its foreign currency obligations. The illusion of wealth was exposed, revealing a hollow core built on short-term debt and optimistic fantasy.
The breaking point arrived in August 1982. Mexico's finance minister delivered the inevitable news in New York. Mexico could no longer pay the principal on its debt. The country was bankrupt. This announcement shocked Wall Street and the world because Mexico was the first domino. If Mexico defaulted, major American and European banks faced ruin from their over-leveraged loans across Latin America. But for ordinary Mexicans, the real shock was yet to come. On September 1, 1982, President Portillo stunned the nation by nationalizing all private banks and imposing strict controls on foreign exchange, effectively freezing citizens' dollar-denominated accounts. The goal was presented as saving Mexico from speculators. The consequence was the annihilation of trust. The peso collapsed repeatedly, inflation surged, and the promised prosperity dissolved into desperate stagnation. The 1980s became known as the lost decade. The middle class, those who had bought homes and saved diligently within the national banking system, were the primary victims. Their life savings were wiped out as the currency's value evaporated.
The global financial system rushed in with a rescue. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the U.S. Treasury provided emergency loans, but these lifelines came with severe chains. The IMF imposed its standard playbook, austerity measures. Public spending was slashed, subsidies disappeared, and wages were frozen. This austerity was not a path to recovery for the people. It was a punishment designed to ensure foreign creditors were repaid. Profits were privatized in New York and London, and the risks, the pain of unemployment, the crushing inflation, the lost opportunities, were socialized onto the Mexican people. The nation lost its economic sovereignty, trading independence for perpetual dependence on international lenders.
The lesson was brutally reinforced in 1994. Despite reforms, Mexico's financial system was still based on a fragile dollar peg and a massive reliance on short-term foreign investment. When political instability hit, investors fled overnight, triggering the tequila crisis. The peso collapsed again, and a $50 billion U.S.-led bailout was rushed through. Again, the purpose was clear: to prevent a systemic collapse in the U.S. and protect investors, not to protect the millions of Mexicans whose savings and jobs were instantly destroyed. The middle class, trying to rebuild after the 1982 disaster, was hit once more. They saw that in debt crises, governments protect the system, the banks and creditors, not the citizens.
The Mexican peso crash, twice over, is not a distant foreign tragedy. It is a mirror reflecting the fundamental fragility of debt-based, over-leveraged systems. Today, the U.S. dollar holds the global reserve status, a position Rome's denarius once held. But the warning signs that preceded Mexico's downfall are present in America today. The U.S. national debt is trillions of dollars larger than Mexico's ever was, growing at an unsustainable pace. The system operates on the dangerous illusion that low interest rates and endless printing can solve problems created by excessive spending. The belief that America is too big to fail is the same hubris that drove the Mexican government in the late 1970s. History is absolute. When confidence cracks, whether due to economic stress or political failure, the collapse is swift and the pain is transferred downward. The wealthy execute capital flight, shifting assets into hard assets, foreign accounts, or gold. The average citizen, whose wealth is trapped in paper promises and digital digits, absorbs the loss. Mexico's experience shows us the dark pattern: pride, denial, collapse, and pain. The peso drowned, and its people paid the price. The question for the American public today is simple. If the debt-based illusion of the dollar system cracks, will we recognize the warning from Mexico, or will we find ourselves waking up to our own lost decade? Real wealth is not found in paper promises. It is found in resilience, assets that hold value, and the knowledge of how the system is designed to protect its architects, not you. History doesn't repeat itself, but unless you learn its most brutal financial lessons, it will surely crush you.